to you guys. I hope you're having an epic day wherever you are in the world. My name is Eric Higgins. I'm a holistic health coach and actor calling out of Portugal currently, and I'm joined by the legendary, I can use that word legendary, health expert, clinical nutritionist, chiropractor, kinesiologist, functional medicine expert, Dr. Bob Rakowski, 3+ decades educating people on how to live their best life. We're talking athletes, regular people, doctors who want to educate their patients on functional medicine, so we're not relying on just the band-aid approach with medications and really looking at root cause. And today we had an idea from one of our great partners, David, about cultivating radical well-being. And I like that word radical. What does that word really mean? And it really pushes us towards one extreme or another. And I heard once, we're either creating our greatest health or we're creating our greatest illness. And no matter what way you look at it, we do have to force in either or invest in either or. And you know what? If we don't choose to invest in our well-being, we will be forced to invest in our illness at some point. And the last I checked, a lot of the issues that people are presenting with, those treatments aren't cheap. So we need to do whatever we can do to shift ourselves into an environment that is health-driven and that allows us to live a quality life. We, just on a personal note, unfortunately, yesterday we lost a close friend here in Portugal who, you know, we've been great friends for the last year. And very much like my own dad, didn't really pay attention to the warning signs. And despite the information I wanted to share, and I shared from the heart, not from the head, because if you share from the head only, you're not going to reach people and guide them towards better health. But I shared as much as I could. But bless him, he didn't take heed of those signs, and he's no longer with us. Not in the physical form anyway. But you know what? We owe it to people around us, guys, to be educated, inspired by health, but also be good educators ourselves in order to show a way for people to follow us rather than tell someone. So if you've got loved ones out there who are stubborn, guys, show them a bit of tough love. Get them on these calls. Share some videos with them around these topics, because sometimes what you don't know will kill you. So treat that with whatever weight that you feel is relevant for you and what's important to you. But we're going to be talking about creating radical well-being. Let's move out of this fear and mentality of illness. Let's focus on health. Let's focus on having that quality of life. And we have no one better in order to help educate people on this subject. So Dr. Bob Rakowski in the house. Great to have you once again.
Well, Eric, always great to be here. You know, sorry for the loss of that beautiful friend, but here's what I know. You and Isa made his life better. I know you were tending to him in, you know, his final days. So God bless you for that. God bless his soul and comfort those that loved him. You know, when we start looking at this title, and way to go, David Meyer, with, you know, radical wellness, you know, that's really lacking in our world. And, you know, as a visual aid, if you're on the Zoom, Instagram, you won't see this, but I pulled up a graphic from the CDC, the Centers of Disease Control. What a bad name, right? Why don't we have Wellness Center? But at any rate, here's the data. 6 in 10 US adults have a chronic disease. Now, if we were to go through the definition of that, it means it doesn't go away. And what they also say is it can't be prevented by vaccines. I think we're beginning to realize that, maybe vaccines aren't once what we thought they were. I'm going to encourage people to look into that with a different eye now. But 4 in 10 have 2 or more. And then they list heart disease, still the top killer, cancer, number 2, chronic lung. You know, I think of Andy Andrews when his mother, you know, he's a great author, great comedian. His mother was dying of lung cancer. And he said, you know what, the only thing worse than sitting at her bedside and watching her gasp for her next breath was realizing soon that she wouldn't be grasping for any breath. And you know what, we owe it to those we love to take better care of ourselves. We should not put anybody through that. Stroke, highly preventable. Alzheimer's, highly preventable. Diabetes, highly preventable. Chronic kidney disease, highly preventable. And that rounds out that chart. But you're looking at nearly $4 trillion a year. And that's one small country, US, representing 4.4% of the US population. So what's the opposite of chronic illness? How about radical wellness? And that's what this talk is all about today.
Beautiful. And, you know, just seeing those statistics right there, you know, no one wants to be in that bracket. No one wants to be a statistic of one of those diseases, because Either you're going quick and painful, quick and violent, or slow, steady, and painful. Either of those, I hope that whatever way it goes, I'm surrounded by family, you know, slow and peaceful, you know, in my bed, you know, and I hope that, wish that for everyone else, and that we create the right environments for us to thrive in that way. But taking it back to the here and now, all we have is now and how we create the environment around us or surround ourselves. But what daily disciplines must people really start to commit to, Dr. Bob, in order to cultivate this sense of radical well-being?
Well, Eric, you know, I'm going to start with a quote from Jim Rohn. He said, "We all must suffer one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret and disappointment." And so I'm going to share a picture here of a guy named Tom Rath. He's Amazon.com's best-selling author. So he started, you know, selling a lot of his books when Amazon came around. And you look at him here, people that can see his picture. In that picture, he's 45 years old. He's got beautiful skin, bright eyes, a great smile. He looks like the picture of health. And you wouldn't know that at age 16, he lost an eyeball to cancer. And when he had the scan done of his body, the doctor took him aside and said, "I'm sorry, my friend, you lost the genetic lottery. You have tumors in your lungs, in your kidneys, in your liver, in your spleen, in your pancreas, in your spine, in your ribs. You won't likely live to see your 37th year. And by the way, if you do live that long, please don't think about having children, because you'll probably give them this horrible illness," which, by the way, was called von Hippel-Lindau disease. But at any rate, in that picture, he's 45 years old. And the reason he wrote this book, Eat, Move, Sleep, was because he found out that that would be his path to a great life. So by the way, the subtitle of this, How Small Choices Lead to Big Changes. And so what he has done since that first episode of cancer in his teens, he's been scanned every 6 months. And he finds out when he eats the right diet, which is, if God made it, it's okay. If man made it, stay away. Eat real food, clean food, not too much, not too often, every color, every day. Then his tumors actually shrink. When he moves appropriately for him, which, by the way, you know, if we look at you, Eric, you know, I mean, it's going to be an animal flow, a ballistic, you know, workout, whether it's kettlebells, barbells, or throwing around some people that think they want to spar with you. But for someone, you know, maybe not of Superman quality, it might be a brisk walk, you know, for 10,000 steps over the course of the day. But when he would move the right amount for him, not too much, not too little, his tumors would shrink. And when he would sleep 8 hours a night, and he would have to allow 10 hours in bed to get those 8 hours, then his tumors would shrink. Anytime he fell down on any of those, they would grow. And then now look at this 30+ year experiment. By the way, he's married, has beautiful children. None of them got his genetic issue. So by the way, shame on the doctors that rained on his parade, rained on his life, tried to zap his future, saying, "Sorry, you're not allowed to have kids because there's a chance they might not be perfect." And last I checked, none of our kids are perfect, but here's a perfect example that our genes are just a small factor, anywhere from 5 to 10% of what you manifest in terms of health, and what you do with those genes, 90 to 95%. And I can't think of a better example to share than Tom Rath. So Eat, Move, Sleep is what we want to do.
Wow, and just when you mentioned that, do you think that's communicated to the general population about that? I believe epigenetics, the term of that 10 to 15% of our genetics playing a role. Do you think that's communicated to most people, or are they encouraged to follow that mentality of, well, if it's in your family, then that's the way it's going to go, and almost lends permission to an individual to just throw caution to the wind, let's say, if they have a history of cancer or certain illnesses in their family? What do you think about that?
Well, let me tell you my clinical experience, and that's all I can speak from, is that most of the time when people come see me, remember, it's a natural medicine center, they're there because they realize medicine doesn't have an answer, and often they are deprived of hope. So I had a stage 4 pancreatic cancer patient. He's on my YouTube channel, and he was sent home to die. And we put him on a protocol, and, you know, Eric, I kid you not, I asked this guy 10 days later, I said, 0, no change, 100, perfect, ideal. How much better are you? He says, I'm 90% better. I said, wait a minute, how can that be? You still have pancreatic cancer. He says, you don't understand. I couldn't leave my house. I had no energy. I couldn't get out of bed. The only thing I get out of bed to do would be to run to the restroom 10 times a day. He said, my life was pure misery. In fact, death would have been a blessing. But he says, suddenly
Wow.
the lights are on. I'm feeling better. I don't have any pain. My bowels are normal. I've got energy and I have hope. And you look at the before and after of his picture. And by the way, I didn't film him day one. I probably should, but he was a very pale green color. His skin looked sick. There was nothing good about what he was presenting with. But ultimately, what I told him is, look, how long you live is never any man's call. That's between you and God. And I promise you, if you do your part, God will probably do his, right? I find him to be pretty good at his end of the equation. And sure enough, within 10 days. Now, as this story gets sad, you know, we were 5-6 months into it. He was running out of money. Natural therapies, insurance won't pay for. They would pay $1 million to poison this guy. So he went back to his oncologist, and his oncologist said, wow, that's amazing. One, I'm shocked you're still alive, but look at how much better you are. Look at how much stronger you are. I think your body can handle more chemo.
Ooh.
Well, guess what? They killed him with the chemo. He didn't live through that. And so, you know, I use that as a teaching tool in a lot of different ways. It's like, okay, look, if something is working, why not stick with it? If something's not working, why go back to it? And even to this day, medicine has a very poor track record with pancreatic cancer. And so when I have patients with pancreatic cancer, I say, you know, and I'll share one story, and we'll get back to our topic of radical wellness. But I had a guy that had extreme means. And he said, you know what? I've got a new hotshot doctor at the biggest cancer hospital in the world. They've got this new treatment that they're really excited about. And I said, all right, here I have only one request. Ask this doctor to let you talk to the survivors of this therapy. Well, he never asked the doctor that question. You know, I don't know why doctors tend to zap power from individuals. He got on this experimental therapy. He was dead in a month. He never had a good day after that. So, you know, how does this happen? Well, you know, I think that the doctors are well-intended. Hey, this could work. Let's try it. Well, could work. Let's try it. Why don't we take something that has a proven track record? And again, with pancreatic cancer, not so good. Not so good at all.
Yeah, that is a tough one, actually. And, you know, when we are so passionate about Chinese medicine and Eastern practices and holistic health, I remember seeing Patrick Swayze at that time, when he was battling pancreatic, that he was one of the longest survivors of that particular form of pancreatic or whatever strain that he was dealing with or mass he was dealing with, but he was using Chinese medicine. And I almost went, wow, I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised because of the power of these superfoods, things that are in nature that are designed to really adapt and heal our system. But we will touch back on that in a little while. But what I'd love to ask Dr. Bob, just around the mental game, because everything starts really here. Well, it starts out here, I believe, initially in the environments we're in, but the environment we create and the thoughts that we tell ourselves or we accept or believe play a huge role in the actions that we take. So what kinds of mental shifts must people kind of get a handle on to make sustainable long-term changes for their health?
Well, Eric, I love that you asked that question. And by the way, I also love the conversation on success you did this last week. Absolutely epic. And I've got the one coming up in this new week. And, you know, I'm always trying to think of something, okay, you know, what new data or what new spin can we give to people that can help them, you know, find their way in sometimes I think it's even reasonable to say a sea of darkness, because there's a lot of darkness out there. And I found this quote just this morning that I really liked. We are the stories that we tell ourselves. And that ultimately is the mental game. And you and I both have a mentor named Eric Worre. And, you know, Eric Worre has been so successful in life in many, many ways, tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions, has the big house, the beautiful wife, the jet, the toys. But he didn't have his health, and he had a family member have a crisis. And last fall, he said, you know what? It's time for me to get my health in shape. And so he had the means to hire trainers, to hire a chef, to develop, as he says, 15 layers of accountability. But couldn't it be just the stories that we tell ourselves? And so ultimately, get this. So Eric Worre said this the other day, which I found was so fascinating. who's going to win? If it's you, the you want to be, or the you that you have been that has, in his case, 58 years of momentum. The new startup versus something that's nearly entrenched in stone, you know? And ultimately, here's the deal. You need to tell yourself a very empowering story and create an environment where you can succeed. And so, you know, you just simply do this. You know what? I haven't made the best choices in my life. I acknowledge that, but from here forward, I'm getting better, and don't bet against me. Now, Eric had success with that story at age 23 as being an absolute, I think it's safe to say, underachiever, if not even a total failure in his economic life, to becoming a multimillionaire. And he said, you know what, I'm going to the top. There's no one stopping me. I'm either getting there or you'll see me dead on the side of the mountain. Well, that level of commitment, but telling himself that story, couldn't we just branch that into this new story of health and wellness? So the mental game really is your identity. And Simon Sinek has, you know, this fabulous TED Talk entitled Start With Why. But sometimes people have feelings and then they take actions and then they get the results. But ultimately, why don't we start with our identity? I am the type of person that makes great choices for myself and those around me. Those are the type of actions that I take, and those are the results that I get. And so when we tell ourselves an empowering story, and better yet, support ourselves with a very powerful supporting cast, we're more likely to get it done. But it starts between our ears, that's for sure.
Yeah, I love that I am statement. We can always let what happened in the past be in the past, but I even, it was a Tupac Shakur, I remember saying in one of his raps, he's like, the rear view is smaller than the front window, so keep it in that proportion, basically. I'm not quoting him in that exactly, but it is very much that you need to forgive and move on and just work on where you are currently, you know. And why do you kind of think that some people struggle, or a lot of people struggle then with just getting their baseline of health up a notch or two, Dr. Bob? What's holding most people back?
The environment. You know, environment trumps willpower every single time. So I gave an obesity lecture, you know, internationally nearly 20 years ago. And I quoted a Harvard physician that said, you know, treating an obese patient in the US is like treating an alcoholic when there's a bar on every corner. He says there's just too much temptation. And when people have that vulnerability, they're going to give into it. And they also said, by the way, food is engineered to be addictive. And it's got all these chemicals in it and things that give that dopamine hit. So they're actually poisoning their body, but loving the process. And, you know, if you've never had your brain chemistry hijacked, well, let me tell you, one, you probably ought to experience it so you know to avoid it. And there's so many different ways of doing it. You know, there's a new life coach that I've partnered with on some level to learn what he has to say. His name is Michael Bernoff. And he says, listen, all these people out there, they're drug dealers and they're dealing dopamine to anybody who will grab it. And whether it's clickbait or an advertisement or, you know, hey, if you do this, you're going to be, you know, rich, famous and sexy, or, you know, whatever they're selling. But oddly enough, they're never selling health. So, you know, there's a lot of money in sickness is the bottom line. And the people are multi-billionaires. We made more billionaires on sickness, selling fear this last couple of years than we probably have in the history of humanity. And that's, you know, hopefully going to be eye-opening. So, okay, we've been through this. What did we learn from it? And that's the question I think people ought to ask themselves. What did we learn from this? And I'll tell you what, the lessons, very, very sadly, I had a mom in today. Now she's a 60-year-old mom, stressed out of her mind. Her 34-year-old son just had a second heart attack, and her daughter had a stroke. And what happened? Well, they both are in medicine and they bought into the medical model, and, you know, hopefully they survive it. But she says, how could this be? How could my kids be so smart in some ways and so stupid in others? And, you know, we got to pray for everybody and take good steps from here forward, because let's face it, there's a lot of bad stuff going on out there.
Wow. So that lady obviously was in tune with the holistic approach and kind of seeing this movement for what it was. And
she could not get past, as she called it, the brainwashing that her children have received in the establishment. So just imagine, Here we have an experiment, completely unproven. We've tried this experiments before. All the animals in the experiment died, but this time we think it's going to be different. Line up, sign up, let's get you, you know? And that's what too many people gave into. Which reminds me, the mental game, zealously inspect all things that you allow to enter your mind, your heart, your soul, and your body. Those great words from Og Mandino and the greatest salesman of the world.
I've quoted you a number of times, actually. It just popped into my head, was the stand guard at the door of your mind. And we always have to stand guard at the door of our minds, not just for outside conversations, but the inside conversations of what we choose to believe. But, when it comes to daily steps, we've talked about mindset, we've talked about environment. What are some other steps that people can take on a daily basis to really start to get their health status up?
Yeah, we talked about eat, move, sleep, and those big three. If you get those three, and by the way, probably in order, it's going to be sleep, move, eat. And people might be shocked by that, but I think that's where the data really is. A good day starts the night before. If you don't move a certain amount, you're prone to obesity, depression, all kinds of chronic illness. And then eat. Well, make good food choices there. But the magnificent seven are these: eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every day. So, let's go with drink right. So, the world drinks coffee, the world drinks tea. You and I are so excited about Reishi infused coffee and tea. Why? Because we have the top superfood on the planet where people get it consistently in a way that they absolutely love and enjoy it. Poop right, that gets a lot of chuckles. In the UK, they call it poo right, but that's about detox. And so we've got our lungs, our liver, our kidneys, our bowel, our skin. All these are part of detoxification, and we live in a very, very, very toxic world. If you go back in the last 120 years of humanity, the greatest advances in longevity are indisputably related to improved sanitation and hygiene. We go back to the Middle Ages where the bubonic plague killed 30 to 50% of the population. Go look at what conditions were like. And this was the statement: the streets were narrow and flowing with sewage. So if you're living in sewage, guess what? You're going to get sick. You're going to get infectious disease. And by cleaning that up, we made that go away. Talk right. We kind of said that a little bit with mindset, but understand that every cell in your body is potentially in communication with every other cell every other moment. And so when you have the right acid alkaline balance, the right oxidation reduction potential, the right omega-3 status, all these things make a big difference on that. And I think we've covered them. Let's go eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right. We're there. So those are the big ones.
Beautiful. And something that you talk quite extensively about as well is personal development, but also spiritual development. What kind of role have they played in your own personal journey, and where does that tie in for other people?
So you put your foot in a certain camp. What mentors do you admire? And so the people that I found that have the most successful lives, and that doesn't mean the most money or the best toys. I mean, those people that have the best life, where they're loving and loved, when they're making a contribution, when they're committed to something bigger than themselves. Spirituality and religion don't have to be one and the same. And in fact, I think sometimes there's even a conflict between spirituality and religion. But even you go back to the Big Bang, and this is well accepted. I don't care if you're an atheist astrophysicist, you say there was a Big Bang. What I think preceded the Big Bang was this wonderful thing called God. But there was this great singularity. They said the whole universe was in about the size of a golf ball and had the temperature of 4 trillion suns. So imagine that. And then it all exploded and we all came to be. So who are we? We're all from the same source, and everybody agrees on that. And where are we going to be after that? Well, that's where we don't have agreement, but most of us is empty space. If you start thinking about that, here's a fact. You look at you and you're a solid, rock solid, amazing individual, but you're 99.99999 to whatever the 10th decimal empty space. Well, how can that be? And my next question is, what's in that space? And if it's love, then I'm going to say you're spiritually aligned. And if it's something less than that, well, you're probably not. But Tom Morris, my favorite author today, talks about the 4 foundations of greatness. And one of those is unity, which he says is the essence of spirituality. And so when we all realize we're from the same source, that we're spiritual beings having a physical existence, then why not acknowledge everyone as being connected to us and be loving in that way? So could you treat the blade of grass like a kindred soul? I don't see why you couldn't. Why couldn't you be kind to that? And I think it was a Mark Twain quote, but he says, forgiveness is the fragrance the lilac leaves on the heel that just trampled it. So, think about that. The heel probably didn't have malice, but, can we always be loving? And I believe we can if we really make it our purpose. And that would ultimately be the essence of spirituality. So, what role does that play? As big a role as you want it to. But the people that I know that have the best lives across the board, they've acknowledged that love is the strongest force in the universe. And with it, their life is a lot better. And without it, it's lacking something.
Yeah, I think that's really, really nice to think on that and feel on that idea, because everyone is different. Everyone's process is different. But I heard a quote from Paul Chek. He was quoting, I can't recall what book he quoted, but he was stating, pray and move your feet. So if you are very spiritual and you just get caught in that, I will pray but don't act upon that, then it's a trap. So whatever way your affiliations are with your beliefs, pray and move your feet. Take action based on what you want, because it's not just going to happen. You need to make that happen, bridge the gap between what's going on with you and where you want to be, because otherwise we're just passive and just almost sitting back in life and just waiting to see what goes on. But great things don't just float into your lap always. We need to work on ourselves to not only expect these great things, but to earn these great things, because I think anything that's just given to us is not truly valued. And I think we're all quested with that challenge: is where do we have our priorities? What do we truly value? And are we willing to put the work in order to reap those benefits? And I think that's an important distinguished point for people to kind of ponder. But just when you mentioned about rest and recovery, I think for me this is the kind of keys to the kingdom when it comes to overall health and well-being. Why is that, Dr. Bob, that rest and recovery is so important if someone wants to create this radical well-being?
Well, one, if we actually look at the data, and I'll give a quote from the medical literature, actually I'll just simplify it, but we all have too much stress hormones circulating in our system. And when our body's in fight or flight mode, that's not rest, that's not digest, that's not procreate, that's not calm chemistry. That's the opposite of all those things, and it's very suppressive to the immune system. And so the best way to lower our stress hormones is very, very simply to rest and to recover. And I've lectured at a number of international sports conferences, and as recently as a few weeks ago, and I got to give a big shout out to the Swiss conference and Ken Kanak and the organizer. But, you find people on both ends of the spectrum. Some people, we have to get them to, at least dial back their training while their body is more broken down than they're recovering from. And myself and Paul Chek and Charles Poliquin, we'd say for years, it's really not overtraining, it's under recovery. And when you look at the stress hormones, the lack of sleep, the blue light, the toxins in the environment, the poor food quality, we have so many things stacked up against our recovery that if we dot the I's and cross the T's on all those good things, we're going to be better off. But very, very simply, ideal training, you get better every time. Better every time, better every time. But what you see is people don't recover, so they get worse. They don't recover, they get worse. They don't recover, they get worse. They don't recover, they get worse. And then ultimately, sadly, something happens where, they realize they need to make a change. It could be an injury that jeopardizes a lot of what they were looking forward to. I see that way too often.
Yeah, it's one of those things as well. Sometimes you don't want to swallow that pill, so to speak, pardon the pun, but if you're not paying attention or you're not doing your due diligence in anything really, especially when it comes to the physical demand on the body, you will be put in your place. And sometimes being knocked back a peg, it can be a big challenge for people, and they can fall into really nasty mental patterns. And that's why it's so important to keep moving. If ever I had an issue with a foot or a knee or whatever it was, I would work the rest of the body just to keep moving, keep the fluids moving around the body, keep the pumps going, so to speak, and also to keep you in that better space in your mindset. But we love Reishi. It's our favorite superfood. We consume it multiple times a day. I often joke, Dr. Bob, I say, if someone was to cut me now, they'd see traces of blood in my Reishi stream. But why is Reishi so powerful for our recovery, and really, particularly in a toxic world, that helps us to deal with this burden of stress?
Well, when you come to eat, move, sleep, if we just use those three, it's a top superfood, has all the fabulous 50, all the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, proteins, carbohydrates, fat, fiber, and water in doses that make a difference to human health. If we put sleep as number one, people that consume it fall asleep faster, sleep deeper, longer, wake up more refreshed. That's right in the medical literature. So it's very powerful with that. When it comes to moving, it's going to modulate the inflammatory process by over a dozen proven mechanisms. And by the way, inflammation creates pain and fatigue, but it also increases what are known as mitochondrial electron transport chains. So, even my elite athletes notice a bump up in their energy, and sometimes in as much as a single dose. And then, we've covered the eat, move, sleep, but what about the Magnificent Seven? What about drink right? Well, when we drink water or tea, it's 99% water, 1% reishi. You get turbocharged coffee and tea. It's going to enhance the brain for that thinking right. It enhances detoxification. And since you mentioned that, one of the more telling stories that I tell people about reishi and its history was there was a case called the case of the frozen addicts. A group of drug addicts in Southern California in the early 1980s injected a synthetic heroin called MPTP, and they all woke up the next day with Parkinson's disease. And the doctors asked them, hey, we want some of this stuff. And they said, why would you want that? Look what happened to us. They said, well, maybe, we'll test it in rats. Maybe someday we'll find a cure for Parkinson's. Well, it took them till 2019 or 2018 to look at reishi and MPTP. You can PubMed that. But they found out that if they gave people that horrible toxin and reishi simultaneously, guess what? They didn't have that brain damage. They didn't get the Parkinson's. And they've tested it with so many other toxins. So imagine having that on board. So now let's talk about my patient that had the 34-year-old son that had heart attacks, 2 of them already. Well, if we go back to PubMed in 2020, people that consume traditional Chinese botanicals, they didn't call out reishi, but there was a 28x decreased probability of them having a serious problem with the virus. And then, listen, if people, I knowingly got exposed to the virus in 2020. Why? Because something called convalescent plasma. My parents are in their 80s. I said, if they get the virus, I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to go to Wisconsin. I'm going to give them some of my plasma, and they're going to beat this. Well, my parents had a good nutrient protocol. They didn't get it until a couple waves later, and they were done with it in a week. They never had a serious issue. And in my entire patient base, which is very reishi infused, I don't have a single patient that was on our protocol that even went to the hospital. So, think about that for a moment. If people did this consistently, prevention trumps cure. I think we'd have people with a lot less challenges if they took on a daily habit that was as easy to do as just putting something better in their cup. That is probably even more delicious. And I look on the screen and, we don't have the gallery view, but I see David Meyer, drinking some beautiful coffee. I saw Adri drinking some beautiful coffee, probably others as well. I see Eric drinking some beautiful coffee. So how fun, right?
Absolutely. And as a process, we were talking about daily habits and shifts. There's nothing more accessible than someone to be able to adjust their daily sipping habit, because you can have the best capsulated supplement in the world, but you may forget to take it. But rarely will you forget to have your morning, afternoon, or evening cup of choice, because it's in our daily habits. So such a great strategy for health and well-being. But Dr. Bob, my last question, just around, before we go to questions here on Zoom, one of the biggest burdens obviously people can face in their lifetime is financial stress, but also chasing time, or as Bob Proctor quite cleverly analyzed once, was the fly buzzing against the window, just bouncing off the glass, just repeatedly bouncing off that glass, but yet a few panes down, the window is open. So people get caught up in this cycle of doing things the same way, stressing over time, stressing over their finances. What advice would you give to people to create more abundance within those areas?
Well, Eric, I'm going to go to a quote that's so powerful. Your network is your net worth. And so when we look around, if you think about it, whoever's watching this, whether replay or live, think about the most successful people you know. And there's a huge probability they didn't get there alone. They didn't get there by adding value. They didn't get there by not creating a team. If you create a team, on a common page, well, that's how you can get where you want to be. So guess what? We have a team that's involved with Reishi infused beverages and other great things where we're committed to every person getting better every day and then sharing something we love with the world. And, I tell people, Kelly and I have a lot of businesses and we've been blessed with great mentors from the beginning. And when we embraced this network marketing model, this scaled faster than anything else. We have a team of over 25,000 people in over 20 countries. In December, we'll cross $40 million in sales. And that is a lot of good in the world. And, oddly, there's an author, and I'll think of his name shortly, but he says, if your finances aren't where they need to be, you might look at a vending machine that's not working and there's a sign on it that says out of service. And he says, put that own sign on yourself. If you're not reaping the rewards you want, it's because you're not sowing the seeds and adding the value. And this is a way to do it in a leveraged way where really just be your best self, share your best self with people, and then share better choices. And if they want to come on board, well, then, we have a lot of people that are on the same page saying, let's win together.
I love that. And guys, if you are open to those ideas, then please come along to Saturday's call. We'll have a conversation around entrepreneurship and growing something of significance so you can create additional streams of income while doing a lot of good, because I think those two things go hand in hand beautifully. So just the questions here before we wrap up. Thank you for giving me that overview, David, as well. Radical, far-reaching, or thorough. I like that. But Molly had a question in regards to, can numbness experienced under the feet be related to a narrowing vertebrae on the lower back? Please advise on how this can be resolved together with potentially OG products. Thank you.
Well, the answer, it can be, right? And so under the feet, I use that as plural instead of foot. And here's what I'll tell people. If there's a problem on one side of the body, there's a strong probability that it's a vertebra. And there's something called dermatomes, and you can look those up, dermatome, dermatomes. A spinal segment will create a very specific pattern of what they call paresthesias or numbness. But when we're talking about the whole bottom of the foot, and especially we're talking about both feet, then that's usually systemic. And the most common challenge with, undesirable feeling in the extremities is actually diabetes. They call it neuropathy, peripheral neuropathy, and they call it actually glove and stocking paresthesias. The feet can have weird feelings. The hands can have weird feelings. I've had people where they've, been threatened to have their foot amputated because they didn't control their blood sugar. And I've got fun videos on my YouTube channel. When we get that under control, we have 3 different cases where we actually saved the limb. And video evidence and patient testimonials in those cases. So really, really powerful.
Beautiful. Question for Vaishnavi. Hi, Dr. Bob. I have a customer that had a hysterectomy in the late 90s. She still has her ovaries, though. She is still experiencing pain in her lower abdomen and lower back. She's currently on the king of coffee, but her blood sugar was at 10.4 today, which is high compared to the previous days. She has changed her diet to a more healthier lifestyle. I'm a bit concerned because she's trying her level best to be healthy, but not sure what is causing this discomfort. Can you please advise on how she can deal with this health issue?
Well, 10.4 is out of control diabetes. And so all the things that we talked about, eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, we need to do that. Ganoderma or Reishi is anti-diabetic by 6 proven mechanisms. On my YouTube channel, I've got a special called Demolishing Diabetes. And there's type 1, type 2, type 3. This would probably be a type 2. So bit concerned because she's trying her best. What's causing the discomfort? We don't know. Lower abdominal pain, it's not likely related to hysterectomy, 25 plus years ago. There's something not right there. And, one thing that's underappreciated with diabetes is it actually disrupts the nervous system of the intestines. People can have serious digestive problems. And if things aren't moving through the gut, there can be gas and bloating, and that can create a whole lot of pain. But ultimately, with a blood sugar of 10.4, we've got to get that under control. And with acute pain, it would be the responsible thing to say, hey, go to someone that can do a good physical exam and make sure there's not any type of acute appendicitis, some diverticulitis, maybe a gallbladder challenge. These are things that are so common in our society. I wouldn't want to advise someone to not get a thorough evaluation when neglecting it could be a serious problem.
Absolutely. I'm just putting in your email, Dr. Bob, there as well, if that's okay, just for Vaishnavi's friend, if she needs any help with consultation or looking at those finer details of nutrition and guidance from that standpoint, even though it's remote, but the email is there. A question here also, we just have to wrap up in a moment as well, guys, so maybe we'll just answer the questions that are in currently. Mary has a question, thoughts on shingles shots?
I don't recommend it, so think about this. So, I tell people that, when you're 3 years old, if you're fairly typical, you get chicken pox. And then if you get really stressed out of your mind at 83, you get the shingles, but it's that same virus that's been in your system the whole time. The enemies of the immune system are stress and sugar. You get stressed out of your mind. People are used to fever blisters. That's a herpes breakout, or maybe they get a cold or flu. All that is just a reactivation of that virus. And I often tell a story. I had a 75-year-old woman come in, and she was miserable. She was holding her arm, claiming it was like it was on fire, and she was taking morphine and other things, and it wasn't taking down the pain. It was shingles. And so, I'll tell the story as I tell it, because there's a teaching point. So I gave her a bottle of reishi spores, and I said, all right, take 4 now and 1 every waking hour. And she came back the next day, and she was ecstatic because her pain went away, but she came back to buy more spores. And I said, well, Judy, you ought to have enough to last you through the weekend. She says, no, I'm taking 4 every hour, like you said. Well, imagine if you did that with a drug, you'd probably kill her. But the beautiful thing about reishi is we knocked out her shingles pain in a matter of hours. And she was reluctant to reduce the dose because she knew how painful it was. It felt like a nerve was on fire, and suddenly she had that relief. And then I finally talked her into, okay, cut it back, and then every other hour, and then maybe every 3rd hour. And, let's just put this in remission. But if you go to PubMed and type in either Ganoderma and or reishi and herpes, which, by the way, there's over 200 strains of the herpes virus, Epstein-Barr, reishi's proven against that. Herpes zoster, that's what shingles is. Reishi or Ganoderma is proven against that. If you look at herpes simplex 1 and 2, fever blisters or genital herpes, it's proven against those as well. So very, very powerful. By the way, it also blocks replication of the HIV virus. So I'd be doing a lot of reishi if I were her.
Absolutely. I see a comment from Rose as well. Dr. Bob treated myself at home with reishi when I had that. I won't name the name. I had it very bad breathing and sore on my head. You told me to increase my reishi intake. Thank God Almighty, reishi, and thank you, Dr. Bob, for always being there for me. So yeah, we do what we can to create the environment for our well-being. Adrian has a question. A 15-year-old son on Contramil for the last 10 years. Need a protocol to replace Contramil as he wants to study to become a commercial pilot.
So I'm not familiar with that med, so I'm quickly looking it up. So Contramil. So let me show you what I do just to get you into my thought process. So sharing screen, where are we? So Contramil mechanism of action is what I'm looking up. Oh, that's Ritalin. Okay, so this is methylphenidate, which is basically a type of speed. And notice it says it's a norepinephrine and dopamine reuptake inhibitor. And there's a lot of side effects to this, and that's just not cool. But Ritalin is something that got a lot of bad press over the years. So what did they do? They just renamed it. And they keep giving it to kids. Yeah. And so, by the way, I've even had doctors, that, a mother will go in and says, look, I know my kid has a problem, concentrating, but I don't want to give him Ritalin. I've read too much about that. And the doctor says, I won't give him Ritalin. I'll just write him a prescription for methylphenidate, which, by the way, is just Ritalin named by a different mechanism. So Ultimately, you can train your mind for more concentration. Reishi can be helpful for that. I would actually use the NeuroTracker software, which should be available wherever you are. Get back to whoever referred you to this Zoom or whatever, but there's a training software, 6 minutes a day, proven to be powerful for attention deficit, which is predominantly what they recommend that drug for. And so good choices, all the things we're talking about, the brain is the most nutrient dependent, energy dependent, stress vulnerable, toxin vulnerable. So we want to work on all these things, but Reishi, a good approach, NeuroTracker, a good adjunct to that.
Excellent. Just the last question from Tilla. Hello, Dr. Bob. I'm new to this community and very excited about these products. I have a 25-year-old autistic son. I'm wondering how to start him on the product. He is high functioning thanks to our alternative lifestyle and homeopathic approach.
Okay. So we have fun testimonials in one of our Facebook groups. So I'm going to share a screen here. And this is kind of fun. And we're not supposed to name names, right? Because the regulators don't like that. But this is a woman that had a very, he wasn't high functioning autistic child. He had all kinds of challenges, and she literally switched him to a hot chocolate a day. There's a picture of him helping his father build a skateboard ramp. And here's what she said. She says, my autistic, anxiety, panic-ridden, ADHD-defiant child wants to work as a shoe salesman. The kid who was scared and anxious to be in public wants to talk to the public and sell shoes. I'm mind blown. And how wonderful is that? So none of the products are in any way bad for anybody that's dealing with any type of brain issue or on the spectrum. And I'm not sure where you are in our wonderful world. Maybe type that in the chat. But, you know, I also like talking about Karen Timer. She's in Canada, and she had a nephew on the spectrum. And, you know, she got him to drink a hot chocolate, and he looked at her, he said, Auntie, I feel 83% less twitchy. Can I have more? And I might not have the numbers right, but he was precise in how he said it. And previously he had a neurologic twitch, like his face would jerk like that. And that's an unprovoked neuron spasm, which, by the way, in an extreme case could become a seizure. And Reishi's proven to be an anti-seizure. So powerful stuff. So nourish his brain, nourish his body in a way that he loves it, and then, you know, reach back to us and tell us how he does.
Excellent. Okay, guys, just to, actually 2 more questions just quickly, and we will have to call it there, guys. Premi is a new customer. She has a bladder infection. What can you suggest?
You know, could reishi be effective for that? In some ways, there's a very simple cranberry juice, something called D-mannose. And what they know is that that sugar blocks bacteria from adhering to the bladder wall and can flush it out. There's also a probiotic called Lactobacillus rhamnosus that's proven to prevent urinary tract infections and overcome yeast infections. So those would be my top recommendations. The challenge with reishi in the bladder is pretty simple. You know, you're going to get most of it in the system. You're not going to pee out those bioactive molecules. So getting something that has action in the bladder might be more valuable. And by the way, drink plenty of water. And by the way, often, you know, couples have fun, right? And the female should probably urinate after that. Just because that flushes out the reproductive tract, and there, you know, any bacteria that was introduced that should be a common practice if the individual is sexually active.
Beautiful. Just a comment from Esther. Is it okay if kids can take it? Absolutely. Dr. Bob, just last comment on that for kids.
Yeah, and so, by the way, when should people take it? Well, I prefer that it should be on board during conception and then every moment of life after that. And so my 4th granddaughter is due in February, and the other 3, you know, we should all think our kids are special and our grandkids are special. And if you have some, trust that they're gifts from God, but how beautiful that my kids were nourished with great nutrition. They weren't intoxicated, and all the moms, there's only 2 of them, right? My daughter and my daughter-in-law were consuming reishi-infused beverages. So literally reishi was on board during pregnancy, safe in pregnancy, and they have animal studies on a condition called eclampsia, which is called the toxemia of pregnancy. And they would give these pregnant animal mothers blood pressure of well over 200, where that's a high enough pressure to damage baby's brain. And when they would induce that in the animal model, but then they would give reishi, baby's brain was not damaged. And so you could go to PubMed and type in reishi, also known as Ganoderma, and eclampsia, and find some pretty amazing studies. But, there's no downside to it. What's the downside to being healthier? Well, you're probably not going to fund the pharmaceutical industry like a lot of people that are less than healthy. So if that's a downside for you and you want to buy the pharmaceutical stock and invest in their financial future, that's your right. But most of us in this group are saying, you know what, why don't we take charge of our health and make the world better and pay it forward in every way that we can.
Beautiful. To wrap up, guys, Saturday we'll be revisiting our conversation around all things entrepreneurship and business and growing this as a movement around the world. Next Tuesday, we will be covering bulletproofing your immune system. We're coming up to holiday season. It's getting colder in a lot of regions, so we will be talking about immune function. So great to have you guys here with us on Zoom. Always great to see your smiling faces and your questions in the chat. Great that you joined us here, guys, on Instagram as well. Dr. Bob, thank you once again for giving me your time, expertise, love, wisdom, and just telling it like it is, being straight from the hip, no ifs, ands, or buts. As you like to do, you like to share the facts, and your opinion just follows the facts. So, Dr. Bob, any closing statements to wrap up the call?
I'm going to wrap up with 4 questions. It seems appropriate today. Wonderful Jim Rohn taught these to Tony Robbins, and successful. So there's so many people, but here are the 4 questions. First question is why? Why did you invest an hour of your time today when there's so many other things you could do? Well, the second question is the answer to the first. Why not? You're literally connected to a group of people that wants to share genuine health information to create radical wellness. And our world really, really needs that right now. Third question is why not you? Someone's going to act on this information. They're going to take the strategies that they need to make their life better. And some of you will even partner with us and pay it forward. And we welcome you, and we're here to support you in any way that we can. And the final question is, why not now? The longer you wait to act on information, the least likely you are to act on it. So take an action, whether it's putting something better in your body, reaching out to a friend and saying, I have something amazing to share with you, or whatever it's going to take to make your day better. But here's what I know. We're all here to be our best and getting better self in service of something bigger to ourselves. And if that mission resonates with you, let's partner up and make the world better. And as always, I'm Dr. Bob Rakowski, absolutely knowing that we can all be happy, healthy, and successful. So good night in that part of the world, good day in this part of the world, and God bless in every part of the world.